Hi there, and in this video we're going to be looking at the most critical variation of a Trojan knight opening, which occurs after these moves, knight c6 and bishop b5. While this is probably the most critical, well I think it is the most critical variation, it's probably not the most popular. Certainly in my practice the most popular variation of the Trojan knight is 2e4, even amongst the strongest players. I think the reason for that is that these positions can be quite difficult to handle for white, and if he plays something slightly wrong, he can end up in a bad position. Obviously the same is true for black as it is with most atomic openings, and if white does play in the most critical way, it's one of the most difficult openings to face. That said, I would generally feel quite uncomfortable playing this way as white. Simply putting the pieces on these squares seems quite unnatural, and if white doesn't come away from the opening with a clearly better position, the middle game can be quite difficult. First of all, we're going to look at the sort of rare options for white after d5. d5 is the most natural move, and it basically prevents white's threat of knight d5, which, for example, if black played something like a6, would come in with a strong, well, winning for white. This of course stops it, as now if knight takes d5, black will simply take on d2 and win the game. So the most common ways for white to play are to push for d pawn, either to d3 or to d4, in order to sort of reopen up this threat of knight takes d5. There are other options as well. I mean, basically there's all sorts of natural looking moves for white here. A lot of them will transpose to the lines with d3 or d4 on the next move. For example, knight a3, a6, and now d3 or d4. I mean, it's hard to see what white can do if he doesn't want to play these moves. Again, also with knight c3, I recommend playing a6. The point of a6 is to get ready for knight takes d5, and to be able to play a takes b5 in response. And it's just a very useful move in the position. Other moves, one key idea for white in this position is to play knight h5, but at the moment if white plays knight h5, queen h4 is an important resource for black, giving him good counterplay. And here queen h3, queen f3 is the best move. The only other option for white is to play knight f6 check, followed by queen h5, but now black's even material up, so it can't be too bad. Queen f3 is more complicated, and after f5, again white has a choice. It's quite a common choice in these types of positions, either king d1 or queen g2. I think in this position queen g2 is if anything slightly better for black. Naturally bishop b4, avoiding the explosion on g7, so saving a piece, followed by queen takes h2, knight takes g7, and now material is equal, but black has a lot of activity and a lot more aggressive pawn structure. So if it's like maybe d4 or h5, and I'd rather be black. King d1 leads to just an unclear position. Very difficult to analyse these types of games after say g6, and both the queens are in offside positions and are both going to come under threat at some point. So it's hard to say who's on top there, but certainly it's not a clear opening advantage for white. So to avoid this queen h4 move, white can try playing h4 or g3. Both of them quite similar in that black would simply respond with e5. This is the move that black always really wants to play. You can play it here because now knight takes d5 is still not possible, and if the white knight comes over to h5, then bishop g4. Now after f3, bishop takes h5, black's at least equal, and after queen f3 we'll get this material imbalance with an unclear game. King f1 is a sort of possibility, not much of a serious one. The idea is basically the same as with d3 and d4, that white is now opening up the threat of knight takes d5, but I don't see that it has really any advantage whatsoever over those moves, and just black probably play knight f6, and he's always going to get good play with his king on a silly square like f1, so I won't say anything more about that one. The most important move apart from well, probably the two most important moves apart from d3 or d4 are knight c3 and queen h5. As I've said, knight c3 will generally transpose off to a6 to the d3 d4 moves, but you might meet it in practice. And queen h5 has more unique positions arising. So after g6, which is forced, queen h4. Now black is pretty much forced to play f6 here. After queen takes h4, black doesn't really have any compensation for this pawn. So f6, and I'd be very uncomfortable here as white, simply because you put another piece in a really strange position. You've gained something from it in that you've blocked the black queen in, but on the other hand, black is always going to get good counterplay by playing moves like h5 and g5. Knight c3 is probably the critical move. White could try, for example, d3 or d4. Both of them will be met by a6. And now, if white continues with his idea of taking on d5, a takes b5, attacking a2, and after defending that, black's really going to try and exploit this queen by playing e5, and this bishop's coming out into g4 or h3, and it's getting very uncomfortable for white's queen. Queen g3 is a sort of cheapo idea, basically trying to come up with the knight, trying to come into h5 or maybe g6 somehow. But after e5, black's just doing really well. After this, knight gets swapped off. This queen just looks silly here. Black's going to get very good play, maybe even h5. Or bishop b4 looks perfectly fine as well. So knight c3 will take us to being the critical move. Now black does have to be a little bit careful here. That it's a natural move e5 is, I think, a mistake, as after queen h3, eyeing this really weak e6 square, and the point is that this queen can't be taken because knight e6 wins. So black has to play f5 blocking it, and now queen goes back to h4 again, sort of pulling these black pawns forward, and now obviously this pawn can't be pushed because of queen h5 simply wins. So black has to take it, knight f6, knight e6 wins as well. So taking this, and now check and knight d5, and white is winning. So e5 is a very bad move. One possibility is bishop b4. So the idea here is to basically just to do without the a6 move, and simply answer any future knight takes d5 with c6, and just try to get counterplay against the white queen. That's a reasonable option. Another option maybe is even h5, just immediately, just saying as soon as you take on d5, I'll play c6, and again attack the queen. I like the move a6. I think it's a good move. And now again, the idea is to answer any knight takes d5 in the future with a takes b5. d4, d3 is similar. Black will basically continue in the same fashion. h5. I think this is the most interesting move. Bishop b4 again is possible, but it seems a bit strange combining this with a6. As you're probably best off, if you wanted to play this way, to play bishop b4 on the last move. Then after knight takes b5, c6. I think black's doing okay, but this a6 move was really a waste. So h5, and black's getting very good compensation against the queen. Okay, d3, like I said, is similar. h5, again you've got the other options. Queen g3, for example. e5 is now a possible move, for the reason that if white tries to do that same trick that we saw a minute ago, swapping the queens off and playing knight takes d5, black doesn't have to swap the queens off, because after f5, queen h4, now he can play g5, and the h5 square is covered by the pawn. So in this position, I think white's, if anything, in some trouble. King d1, say e takes f4. Okay, so I mean that's pretty much it for the alternatives to the main move, which is, or the main moves, which are d3 and d4. And we'll probably look at them together because they're very, very similar. So we'll do that in the next video. Okay, thanks for watching.